Just a heads up that I am on the cusp of losing my voice. We're real sick, Pa. We got laryngitis. You know where that's from? Little House on the Prairie. That's right, we go deep here. But yeah, there's not much left, and it remains to be seen how much voicing over I can actually do for this video. But there are a number of jobs to get into. Here is a 1975 Gibson Deluxe Gold top. You'll recall that we had a similar guitar in here a couple months back, and this has all the usual features of its era. It's got the mini humbuckers, it's got the stack laminated or pancake style body. Other than that, it's pretty much your average Les Paul. I think it may have had a refret at some point. Might need a little refreshing. And to be honest, they did. They went pretty low. I'm seeing 28, 26 thousandths. So it's functional. Many people would think that's kind of on the cusp of too low. The owner is not getting along at all with these tuners. Does not like them. He wants them gone. And these are double ring. Heavens no. How could you? Well, given that half the 70s Les Pauls I've seen have had replacement tuners, and almost all of them were Grovers, I think this is perfectly in keeping with historical precedent. Anyway, it's not your guitar. It's not your concern. In fact, if you do own one of these in all original shape, someone else changing their tuners makes your 1975 Deluxe even more collectible. Joe Bonamassa will pick yours first when he asserts prima nocta over the guitar fiefdom. The saddles are deeply worn and or grooved or messed with, so the owner has purchased a new bridge to go in there. The first thing I notice when I pick it up is it's got one of those one-note fretboards. It looks like the neck pickup is acting as a special kind of capo. Strings resting right on it. So we should probably do something about that. You know, when we depress the string at the last fret, we expect to see some clearance between it and the top of the pickup. Usually for these guitars it would be 2.5 to 3 millimeters, somewhere around 3/32 to 1/8 of an inch. In this case there's 0, which does not bode well. See if we can lower that. And hey, we can! That's great. Right off the bat, there are a number of buzzes, and when I grabbed an F chord, the string, high E string, managed to get stuck on the edge of the fret here. Okay, it's probably not going to do it ever. Oh yeah, it will. It'll do it every time you... Be careful when you're bending. The height of the nut slots is a little bit irregular. Lower strings seem to have enough clearance. B and E are sitting right on top of the fret. Lots of little bumps and humps in these frets. And the prospect of dressing them out of what in this case is 26 thousandths of an inch tall. I think we might be in refret territory again. This player kind of expected it. I've done other work for him. I know that he likes a bit more fret than what we have here. Hopefully with the use of the neck jig we won't have to dress as much material or height off the top of the frets to get them into playable shape. Neck relief is pretty close to non-existent because there is a hump in the central frets. The refret process went just the way it usually does. But earlier in the week I ran into a GNL bass that kind of had me stumped because it supposedly had Fender-style sideways installed frets. But it didn't. I couldn't drive them out sideways. And it turns out they went in from the top. This is a G&L bass from 1981. I didn't film the whole thing because I didn't want to subject you guys to 3 fretting videos in a row. It's too much even for me. I did take some short things for Patreon and I'll do a little edit and you can learn about this thing anyway. 1981. That's fairly early in the company's history. For those who don't know, G&L stands for George and Leo, Fullerton and Fender, respectively. After Leo Fender sold his company to CBS in 1965, he started doing some work with Music Man Instruments, and eventually ended up building for them as well. That relationship didn't work out, and they parted ways. But he had this little facility that he'd set up, so he decided he wanted to start building again for himself. And in 1979, he brought George Fullerton on, who was one of the first Fender employees back in the late 40s, who had a lot to do with the design of the broadcaster and the Strat and everything that makes Fender Fender. So I've come to the setup portion of the event here, and something funny going on with these saddles here. You see that these three are staggered in a way that you would normally expect to find. The low E here, however, is far forward and is about even with the G string. It is not retracted back, and if I get a screwdriver in there, I can push it forward, but it reaches a certain point and it refuses to go any farther back. And the owner is surmising that the lead screw here is too long and that it's actually bottoming out in the tapped portion of the saddle block here. So we may have to shorten that a little bit. Now I'm going to take a quick little preliminary measurement because these things are fairly well intonated, and I expect I'm going to need to bring this back, probably in the range of another 3 millimeters-ish. I'll take a preliminary measurement here just to sort of get things roughed in my mind, and I think I'll probably have to move it back, at least, probably 4 millimeters, maybe 5. So, yeah, that's a little odd. Everything else is really nicely made on this bass. We'll just loosen it off entirely to begin with. Oftentimes, like in this A string, the spring which is holding tension against the saddle piece itself, sometimes they can be compressed to the point where there is no more springiness to them, and we have to shorten the spring, but that's not what's going on here in this case. Yeah, that seems like it's a fairly long screw for what's going on here. Way more than is necessary. I'll probably end up having to clip the spring too, but we'll start off with just cutting back the screw. It's like a custom-made machine screw. It's kind of an odd head shape. And looking inside the saddle, yes, it is very much a blind hole there. Stops somewhere around the point where the barrel starts. So I'm going to knock off about 4 or 5 millimeters. Well, I'll start off with 4 millimeters to be on the safe side. I can always take more off and see what happens. I tell you, these little abrasive cutoff wheels are some of the best things going when it comes to Dremel tools. They really work great. I was going to say something profound here about the nature of the sparks coming off this steel, saying in the moment they looked kind of orangish, but seeing them here, yeah, no, they're not high-speed steel sparks. They seem to be just regular old carbon steel. So, goodbye, profound thought. Have to file a slight chamfer on the edges here to soften the lead into the screw and get rid of any burr. Otherwise it won't function. Yeah, backed it off to its fullest extent. I think that'll do. That should get us in the ballpark anyway. I have to compress against the spring a little bit here to get things engaged. Yeah, I think I'm going to end up having to cut a little bit off, but let's string it up and see. The 3 lower strings are intonating pretty well. The G string, however, is still a bit too sharp, and we seem to run into the same issue as on the E saddle. I can't actually bring that back farther. This screw also needs to be shortened slightly. I think it would be crazy that they made screws of individual lengths for each of the different strings, but maybe they did. Besides the worn out saddles, this bridge base is really, really concave. It's warped downwards to a degree that makes saving it almost impossible. So it's time for a new one. The refret on this went as per usual. We're solidly in the volute era. And note that this is a maple neck Les Paul, multi-ply laminated. They did this for a number of years. There's some severe sun tanning going on here. This is also the era of the super gigantic integral washer bushings, which just look a little bit odd to most people. I'll have to force them out using the back of an appropriately sized drill bit. A quick plugging of the extraneous screw holes. I can tell that the nut is not going to survive this process. I'm going to score around it and take it out. And this is also a time when they stopped using those old nylon nuts that we love so much from the 50s and went to this kind of plastic, which is not so great. It was at this point in the proceedings when my wife called me on the phone from our front garden, saying some random man had walked up our short little driveway and asked pretty creepily if she would drive him to a job interview 2 streets over. I stopped marking out the nut at that point and went upstairs and made a few things clear. I don't think my client was expecting it, but I thought we should give those light areas a head start and color them in a bit. And here is a lovely little Suzuki guitar. Most people will know that the Suzuki method was quite a mainstay in music education during the second half of the 20th century. Shinichi Suzuki was a violinist who came up with and sort of ran with the idea that children could learn music with the same aptitude and using the same mental facilities as they do when acquiring language. So if you start them off really early, like preschool age, good results happen. He came up with a program shortly after the Second World War in Nagoya Prefecture, and eventually it made inroads into North America and around the world. They taught a number of different instruments, primarily violin, but also guitar, and they published a lot of books. Suzuki's father actually owned a violin making operation, been in business since the 1890s. And as in most areas of Japanese guitar culture, you sort of end up with these kind of vertical monopolies, where you publish the music, you offer the education, the tuition to the students, you produce the instruments, and you also promote concerts and publish things like magazines and stuff. I think there were a couple of manufacturers that eventually ended up building for the Suzuki label, producing what are usually beginner's instruments, at least for foreign export. They did make some fancy models for the Japanese domestic market in the 70s and 80s. Judging by the label in this one, this is from the 1960s through the mid-70s. Made in Nagoya, and it's a lovely little guitar. This one is X-braced, it's designed for steel strings, and it's not unlike a Martin size 1. It really is, with 14 frets to the body, which is kind of cool. Delicate little thing, sounds really nice. This has got a top crack, so we have to put some glue in there. I love this. It's got a couple of homemade tuning peg buttons on there when the original ones broke. Good work. This is a fairly tight crack. Being June, it's a good month for gluing these things. The wood tends to have swelled back up after a period of winter dryness, and so things tend to be quite tight, which also can make it a bit of a challenge to get the glue down in there. Of course, you've seen me do this before. I use a little suction cup and sort of pump the glue down through the crack. Got my finger on the inside supporting things, and I'll also be able to feel when that glue comes through to the other side. Usually takes a couple of applications. Lightly dampened paper towel to get rid of the excess. I use a number of very powerful magnets. And strive to make sure this is as level as it can be. I think a clamp might be in order. Yeah, so you guys who like parlor guitars, or maybe you're looking for something to learn repair on, do some tinkering, This is a lot of guitar for $100, man. Don't sleep on these. These early ones. Got a beautiful piece, solid spruce top. Beautiful Indian rosewood fingerboard. The frets are good, hard fret wire. And they're tall, they're like 40,000, so you can dress them. This thing got played, and there's not too much wear on the frets. Scale length is, I think it's 640 millimeters, which is about 25 and an eighth. So it's not a miniature guitar, you know. Don't know what the neck joint is like. I suspect it's probably got a dovetail. The inside is a very standard kind of X brace. Looks all familiar. Except the neck block is this odd construction made of two pieces. Don't know what that's about. I'll put a little cleat in there too, in the area where there's not very much support. Back to the Les Paul. I'm going to put those new Grover tuners on there. The nice people at Grover packaged 5 extra screws this time. With my inflamed sinuses, this is now balishing. Okay, the cracks are all stitched up. Put some extra light strings on it, and it's ready to go. It's really lovely. I mean, this bridge is intonated like an early 20th century Martin. You know, it's not quite there, but it's good enough for what you do with it, you know? And, yeah, I'm kind of impressed with this thing. Back to the Les Paul. I'm going to rough in the saddle intonation using the old saddles as a guide. Out with the old, in with the new. I'm going to establish the outside string-to-string spacing on a Gibson Tune-o-matic. That's usually just around 2 inches, maybe around 52 millimeters. Although, you might want to check and see how your strings line up with the pole pieces on the pickups, because these can be shifted laterally one way or the other, and sometimes, you know, you don't get perfectly even spacing. It's nice to have the strings go over top of the pole piece, so just double check. In this case, I'm around 51.8 millimeters-ish, just over 2 inches. Now I can set some calipers and get those lined up. I prefer even string spacing rather than graduated. But to each their own. And if you look at original examples, there's quite a bit of leeway. Now we get to hit the guitar with a hammer. No kidding, this is the way Gibson used to do it. I don't know if they still do it this way, or if they use pre-slotted bridges. I don't know. But I've lowered the bridge down so that the adjustment wheels are actually contacting the bushings, so I'm not like banging on free space. And it's just a little tap. And that's going to establish marks, which I'll go and firm up using my nut slotting files. Obviously, you save an old set of strings for this kind of setup and don't continue to use the ones that you've hammered. And these are not big canyons, these are just little divots. That's all that's necessary. And there we go. All set for another 50 years of hard rockin'.
you.